Hey guys, Magus here, and I want to go back to normal and make a sort of, I guess, a traditional video game video that I'm known for. So, in that case, what I just an FYI too, someone asked me if I could do a rant on the whole COVID-19 situation, and I'll just address this right away. I'm not going to make any videos on that, okay? Because I'm pretty sure we're all sick of hearing it. So that's all I got to say on that. Now, what do I want to talk about? And hopefully you guys want to talk about it. And I really want to see if you guys want to do some video responses or just sort of, comment sections or just talk about this. I want to talk about MAME. Yep, I know MAME, multiple arcade machine emulator, but the reason I've been thinking a lot about MAME is you go to the store, you go to Walmart, Best Buy, whatever, mostly Walmart because of the situation we're in. Fuck, I mentioned it again, but regardless, what I want to say about it is you see the one-up machines, which is a pretty novel and cool concept. But my whole thing on that is you look at some of these arcade machines, and I'm gonna point one out in particular. It's the Marvel one, the one I believe with Marvel superheroes, and I think one of Marvel vs. Capcom. I'm not sure, but I do know that one of the games on there is Punisher, the arcade game. All right, so why does that spur this whole discussion about MAME? Well, I think in general, and just before I get to that point, as you guys know, I can be very wordy at times. I think the important thing that we need to remember is we talk about emulation and how it's free, and I'm an advocate for emulation, and I love stuff like RetroPies and things like that. And I don't own a RetroPie, but I think it's an awesome idea and something I would like to own down the line. But we talk about how they make it easy with, quality of life things, speeding it up, save states, that type of stuff. But I think one thing that gets forgotten in the whole mix of emulation is its purposes for archiving. What do I mean by that? I think that is overlooked, and it's probably one of the most important factors for all emulation. Now, I'll explain why MAME is probably a little bit more important than compared to, say, consoles and things like that. It's an archive, and it's an archive that is a necessity. Oftentimes, we find arcade games in particular have been lost to the winds of times. And a lot of them never got ports to home consoles. And even at that, those ports were not the exact, how can I put it, arcade perfect emulation. You would, now, of course, some would compensate. A prime example of this would be the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 game on the NES. That game was, in my opinion, a great port, but by no means in terms of graphics and sound was it a perfect port in that sense. But it did add 2 levels to it. But for the longest time, we couldn't play a perfect arcade emulation as we could today. Now, I'm pointing this out because a lot of arcade games, they lose their copyrights. Or a lot of these companies don't even exist, and we lose them, and we can't play their exact arcade versions. Now, let's go back to the case of Punisher, for example. These one-up machines are about, $300, $400 in some cases. And Ninja Turtles is another example of this, too. And the point that I absolutely want to make is that $300 to play 3 games is not cheap by any means. That's pretty pricey. But thanks to MAME, we could play that game, Punisher, right? We could play it free of charge. We could play it that way. Because of the licenses issues or whatever was keeping it from being ported to anything, MAME was a good way to experience that game in its own arcade form. Now, I believe there is a Genesis or Mega Drive or whatever port of it. I believe someone can correct me on that. If I'm wrong, you can let me know. But I believe there's a Genesis port of it. But there was no other way to play it. And if, and it's a beat 'em up. So, I mean, you do get two other games, but is it really worth shelving out $300 to experience the arcade perfect version of that? And also, that game would probably be otherwise lost to the to the winds of time. And that's unfortunate. It's the fact that MAME is able to keep these games alive. A lot of people, critics of emulation, don't look at it that way. There is literally, unfortunately, not many ways to play. Or I'm trying to think, what was that last video by Gaming Historian? He did, I forgot his newest video, but he stated that one of the game in it is super expensive. And he just says play it through emulation. And I think that's important because it keeps these games for historical and archival reasons. And I really honestly think that's a good thing. Now, going back to arcade games in particular, with a console, it's a little different, okay? And to be honest, I think in some cases, like, let's take a look at Pac-Man and Super Mario Brothers. How many fucking ports of those games are there? There's tons of them. It's easy to get, so I rarely emulate those. I mean, I can grab it, play on my Switch, the end. But something like Punisher, I can't. Something like a favorite old Konami game that a lot of people don't know about, and I was introduced through emulation, is Mikey High School Graffiti. What is that game for those that don't know? If you watch my channel, I think I did a video on this probably 10, 12 years ago. But Mikey High School Graffiti is this game where you're a kid in class, you run around, you headbutt teachers, and I mean, it's ludicrous, and you avoid jocks and all kinds of shit to get to your girlfriend and ditch school. And I believe there's a few ports of that game. But I think they're like Spectrum ports and just really old PC computers, maybe a Commodore port. I'm not too sure. But I know there was a couple ports, but even those have been lost to the sands of time, winds of time, whatever. It's been lost, except through MAME. MAME is able to archive that and keep that game, not bring it to the mainstream, but you're able to discover it and play it. And it's a game I personally like, and I would not have discovered it without MAME. Because you can't just walk in, especially with the current state of arcades, and say, oh, look, there's Mikey fucking arcade game. I can fucking play it. Yay. But that's not how it works. And especially, that's another point. With the way arcades are, those are kind of a dying breed. They are a dying breed. Now we're getting barcades, and it's kind of fashionable to like arcades now. But you don't see them. And especially most arcades that are out there, you get stuff like claw games and skee ball. And I like myself a good game of skee ball. But we don't really see these arcade games anymore. And again, we got licensing issues. Another big example of this was it a year ago, 2 years ago, Capcom released that plug and play that was $300 and it finally had Aliens vs. Predator? I mean, how else could you play that? Without it. Now, of course, some of these games are saved, like the Capcom Beat 'em Up collection from a couple of years ago for Switch, PS4, whatever. A compilation that I love. It had games that have been ported tons of times, i.e. Final Fight, but also games that were never really ported, like Warriors of Fate. I think maybe had a port or two and may have appeared in one compilation, and forgot the other two names, the mech one and that crazy battle one, but that game was lost. So was the Dungeons and Dragons arcade games because of licensing issues, except they re-released it for PS3, and the only real easy way to play it is on Steam, but we don't even have it on modern consoles. So even at that, we'll get rare ports. Let's go back to Ninja Turtles, same thing. There was a port of that game. And unfortunately, you can't play it. really, except pay $300 for it. And I believe that port that they did release of it, like maybe 13 years ago or so, is gone. I mean, unless you still have your old ass Xbox or something. So really, it's a question of not just convenience, but keeping these games relevant and kind of we don't have to lose them completely. How many of these games would we have lost without MAME? And again, remember, I'm talking about arcade games. You know, even think about it too. The Mortal Kombat games, they only got one port what was it? Last gen. We don't have them on modern games, and we got a 1-up arcade, and then we got those tiny arcade ones of Mortal Kombat 1. But that's kind of hard to play. You could play $20 just to play Mortal Kombat on a little tiny arcade machine. But again, for your convenience and for what it is, it would be just easier to emulate it. You know, I mean, so many games. I could keep going on, tons and tons of games, Now, I'll give props to some companies who are bringing it to Switch and PS4 and things like that. SNK is one that just keeps bringing their library up and up and up, onto the Switch and all that. And it's, great to play those games. A lot of one thing that crazy about SNK is they did make some beat 'em ups. Like Sengoku and Mutant Nation, I think that's the name of it, and a few others. And I mean, that's pretty fucking cool that they're doing it, but otherwise, the only other way to play it prior to those ports were MAME. So, in conclusion, I think MAME is probably our most important emulator. My discussion is, do you agree with this? And why do you agree or don't agree? And do you think archival is the most important reasons for emulation? So, I would love to see at least one video response. If not, that's cool. And all I gotta say is, with that, guys, Mag is out.